The morning sun cast long shadows through the crystalline walls of Kaelin's study, but the light seemed muted, as if the very air held secrets that refused illumination. Elara traced her fingers along the spine of an ancient tome, its leather binding worn smooth by countless hands that had sought answers within its pages. The weight of discovery pressed against her chest like a stone, each revelation from the previous night's research adding another layer to the mystery that surrounded both her and the enigmatic Lord of Spring. "You're up early," Kaelin's voice carried from the doorway, rich and warm despite the tension that had settled between them like morning frost. His dark hair caught the filtered sunlight, and she noticed how the shadows beneath his eyes spoke of sleepless hours spent wrestling with thoughts he wouldn't share. "I couldn't sleep," Elara admitted, turning to face him fully. The distance between them felt charged with unspoken words, with the pull of something deeper than mere attraction. "These books, they speak of curses that bind the Fae courts together in ways I never imagined. But they also speak of betrayals that echo through centuries." Kaelin's expression shifted, a flicker of something vulnerable crossing his features before he schooled them back into careful neutrality. He moved into the room with that fluid grace that marked him as something other than human, but she caught the slight hesitation in his step, as if he carried invisible chains. "What did you find?" His question held the weight of resignation, as if he already knew the answer would change everything between them. Elara opened the tome she'd been studying, revealing pages that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. The text was written in the flowing script of the old Fae language, but somehow she could read it as clearly as if it were written in her native tongue. It's about the Night Court's exile, but not the version told in the common histories. This speaks of a vow made in desperation, a bargain struck between courts that should never have been enemies. The silence that followed stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Kaelin moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, smell the cedar and wildflower scent that seemed to cling to him like a second nature. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me what you've learned, Elara. Tell me how much of the truth you've uncovered." She looked up at him, seeing past the mask of authority he wore to the pain that lived in the depths of his green eyes. "I've learned that Queen Seraphina of the Night Court wasn't exiled for the reasons the histories claim. She was betrayed by someone she trusted, someone who made a vow that bound not just her fate, but the fate of the fate. Entire Spring Court." Kaelin's jaw tightened, and she saw his hands clench at his sides. "Continue." "The vow was sealed with blood and starlight, witnessed by the ancient powers that govern the passage between worlds. It bound the Night Court's queen to exile, but it also bound the one who made the vow to a curse of diminished power, a slow decay that would eventually consume the Spring Court entirely." Elara's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fed by the certainty of her discovery. "The only way to break such a vow is through the willingness of one who shares the blood of both courts, someone who can stand at the crossroads between light and shadow." The book slipped from Kaelin's hands, hitting the floor with a sound like breaking glass. He turned away from her, walking to the window that overlooked the gardens of the Spring Court. The roses that bloomed there were magnificent, but Elara could see now what she had missed before: the subtle signs of decay at the edges of their petals, the way the leaves curled as if fighting against some invisible blight. "You know," she said softly, "don't you? You know who made that vow." "I know." The words came out rough, scraped raw by emotion he could no longer contain. "I know because I lived it. I watched her eyes fill with tears when she realized what I was about to do. I felt the magic tear through my veins like liquid fire when the vow took hold. And I've spent every day since wondering if their call was another way, if I could have saved my court without destroying hers." Elara felt her heart constrict at the pain in his voice. She moved to stand behind him, not quite touching but close enough that he would feel her presence. "Tell me what happened, Kaelen. Tell me the real story." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might refuse to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of regret. "Seraphina and I were not enemies. We were everything to each other. The Night Court and the Spring Court had been allies for thousands of years, bound by trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. But more than that, Seraphina and I had found something that neither of our courts had ever believed possible: love that transcended the boundaries between shadow and light. The garden below them seemed to shimmer in the morning light, and Elara wondered if it was her imagination, or if the very air around Kaelen responded to his emotions. "What changed?" "War," he said simply. "The human realm began to encroach on our territories, armed with iron weapons and a new kind of magic that could bind our power. The other courts summer, winter, autumn they wanted to retreat deeper into the Fey realm, to seal the borders and let the humans claim what they would. But Seraphina and I believed we could find a way to coexist, to build bridges instead of walls. But someone disagreed. My advisor, Theron. He was ancient even by Fey standards, had served the Spring Court for longer than I had been alive. He came to me with prophecies, with visions of what would happen if the humans gained too much power. He showed me images of our people enslaved, of the magic that sustained our realm, draining away into the iron-hungry earth of the human realm." Elara could hear the anguish in his voice, could imagine the weight of responsibility that had pressed down on him. "What did he ask you to do?" "He presented me with a choice. I could bind myself to a vow that would exile Seraphina and her court, casting them out into the spaces between worlds where they could do no harm. In exchange, the Spring Court would be protected from the worst of the human incursions, but at the cost of my own power and the slow decay of everything I had sworn to protect. And you chose to save your people. I chose to save everyone." Kaelen's laugh was bitter, filled with the kind of regret that came from making impossible decisions. "I believed Theron when he said it was the only way. I believed that sacrificing my happiness, my love, my very essence, was a small price to pay for the survival of both our courts." Elara reached out then, her hand finding his shoulder. He didn't pull away, but she felt the tension in his muscles, the way he held himself as if he were afraid to accept comfort. But it wasn't, was it? "The only way, I mean." "No." The word came out broken, barely a whisper. "I learned too late that Theron had his own agenda. He wanted to consolidate power, to become the true ruler of the Spring Court, while I slowly faded into nothing. He used my love for Seraphina against me, twisted my desire to protect everyone into a weapon that served only his ambitions. Where is he now? Dead. I killed him myself when I finally understood the depth of his betrayal. But by then, the damage was done. The vow was sealed, witnessed by powers too ancient and too alien to be easily swayed. Seraphina was cast into exile, her court scattered to the winds, and I was left to watch my realm slowly die, while I grew weaker with each passing season. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of revealed truth. Elara could feel the magical resonance of the vow even now. A discordant note that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the Spring Court. It was like a poison in the air, subtle but persistent, eating away at the vitality that should have flowed through every leaf and flower. "How long?" she asked. 200 years. Kaelen turned to face her, and she saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. 200 years of watching my people suffer for my mistake. 200 years of knowing that somewhere in the darkness between worlds, Seraphina endures an exile that should have been mine to bear. But you said the vow could be broken. You said it required someone who shared the blood of both courts. I said that because it's what the old texts claim. But I've searched for 2 centuries, Elara. I've sent agents to every corner of the Fey realm and beyond, looking for someone who might carry the bloodlines of both spring and night. The few who showed promise died before the ritual could be completed, consumed by the very magic they tried to channel. Elara felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't fear that moved through her, it was recognition. What if you didn't have to search anymore? What if the person you needed was already here? Kaelin's eyes widened, and she saw understanding dawn in their green depths. Elara, no. I won't allow it. I won't risk your life for my mistakes. It's not your choice to make, she said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. And it's not just about your mistakes anymore. The curse is spreading, isn't it? I can feel it in the air, see it in the way the plants struggle to grow despite the magic that should sustain them. How long before it reaches beyond the spring court? How long before it affects the other realms? He couldn't meet her eyes, and that was answer enough. The barriers between the courts are weakening. If the spring court falls, the balance that keeps all the realms stable will collapse. The magic that flows between the human realm and the Fey realm will become chaotic, unpredictable. Millions of people, both human and Fey, will suffer. Then we don't have a choice, do we? We? Kaelin's voice was sharp, with something that might have been hope, or might have been fear. Elara, even if you do carry the bloodlines we need, even if you could survive the ritual, there's no guarantee it would work. The vow has had 2 centuries to sink its roots deep into the foundation of reality itself. Trying to break it might kill you, might kill us both, and leave the curse stronger than ever. But it might also save everyone. Elara moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath on her face. Kaelin, I've spent my entire life feeling like I was searching for something I couldn't name. Every time I touched a plant and felt its life force respond to me, every time I walked through a garden and felt the magic singing in my veins, I knew I was meant for something more than the quiet life I'd built for myself. You don't understand what you're asking for. I understand that I care about you. The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest in the morning light. I understand that I care about the people of this court, about the balance between the realms, about the future that hangs in the balance. But more than that, I understand that I've been drawn to you since the moment we met, and I don't think that's coincidence. Kaelin's control finally cracked, and she saw the full weight of his longing in his expression. Elara, I have loved one woman in my very long life, and my love for her destroyed everything I touched. I won't make that mistake again. What if it's not a mistake? She whispered, reaching up to touch his face. His skin was warm beneath her palm, and she felt the slight tremor that ran through him at her touch. What if we're meant to be here, in this moment, with this choice before us? What if the magic that brought me to your realm knew exactly what it was doing? You're asking me to risk everything on a hope, on a possibility that might be nothing more than wishful thinking. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust that maybe, just maybe, love doesn't have to be a curse. Maybe it can be the key to breaking one. For a long moment, they stood there in the filtered sunlight, the weight of the decision hanging between them like a bridge that could either carry them to safety or collapse beneath their feet. Then Kaelin's hand came up to cover hers, his fingers threading through hers with a tenderness that spoke of carefully guarded hope. "If we do this," he said quietly, "if we attempt to break the vow, there will be no going back. The ritual will change you, change us both, in ways that might not be reversible. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to try," Elara said. "But first, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." The book mentions a ritual, but it doesn't give specifics. How do we break a vow that was sealed with blood and starlight? Kaelen was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her knuckles. The ritual requires 3 components: the willing sacrifice of one who shares both bloodlines, the presence of the one who made the original vow, and the forgiveness of the one who was wronged. Even if you are who I think you are, even if you're willing to risk everything, we still need Seraphina. Then we find her. Elara, she's been in exile for 200 years. She's in the void between, a place that exists outside of time and space as we understand them. The few who have tried to reach her have never returned. But it's possible? Theoretically, yes. But the journey itself is dangerous beyond measure. The void between is a place where reality becomes fluid, where the very concept of self can be lost if you're not strong enough to maintain your identity. And even if we reached her, even if we found her alive and sane after 2 centuries of isolation, there's no guarantee she would forgive me. There's no guarantee she would help us break the vow that tore her from everything she loved. Elara felt the magnitude of the task before them settle over her like a heavy cloak, but instead of being daunted, she found herself energized by the challenge. Then we'll have to be strong enough. We'll have to find a way to reach her, to convince her, to make her understand that the vow that separated you has become a threat to everything both of you once fought to protect. We? You don't think I'm going to let you go alone, do you? If I'm the key to breaking this curse, then I need to be part of every step of the process. Besides, she added with a smile that was only slightly forced, I've always wanted to see what lies beyond the borders of reality. Kaelin's laugh was soft, but it carried a note of genuine warmth that hadn't been there before. You're either very brave or very foolish, Elara Thornwick. Maybe I'm both. Maybe that's exactly what this situation requires. He studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing the risks against the possibilities, the potential for failure against the certainty of slow destruction if they did nothing. Finally, he nodded. If we're going to do this, we need to prepare carefully. The journey to the void between requires more than just determination. We'll need protective charms, anchoring spells, and a way to navigate the spaces between worlds without losing ourselves in the process. How long do we have to prepare? A few days, maybe a week if we're lucky. The curse is accelerating, and I can feel my connection to the spring court's magic weakening by the hour. If we wait too long, I won't have enough power left to make the journey, let alone complete the ritual. Elara felt a surge of urgency, but forced herself to remain calm. Then we start now. Show me what I need to learn. Teach me what I need to know. If we're going to save both our courts, if we're going to break a curse that's been festering for 2 centuries, then we need to be prepared for anything. Kaelen nodded, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that might have been genuine hope in his eyes. Come with me. There are things you need to see, things about your own heritage that you haven't yet discovered. If you truly carry the bloodlines of both courts, then there will be signs, markers that will help us understand exactly what we're dealing with. He led her from the study through corridors she hadn't seen before, past tapestries that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. The deeper they went into the heart of the Spring Court's palace, the more she could feel the magic that flowed through its foundations. But she could also sense the discord that the curse had introduced. Like a musical note that was just slightly off-key, they stopped before a door that was carved from a single piece of what looked like crystallized starlight. The surface was smooth and reflective, but the reflections it showed were not quite true to life. In the door's surface, Elara could see herself, but her reflection seemed to shimmer between two different images, one showing her as she was, and another showing her with silver hair and eyes that held the depth of midnight skies. "The mirror of lineage," Kaelen explained, his voice reverent. "It shows the truth of a person's heritage, reveals the bloodlines that flow through their veins. If you are indeed descended from both courts, it will show us exactly how those bloodlines have manifested in you." Elara stepped closer to the door, and as she did, the reflections became clearer. The image of her with silver hair and midnight eyes grew stronger, and she began to see other details, the way shadows seemed to bend around her, the way starlight seemed to gather in her hair like a crown. But the other reflection remained as well, showing her with the warm brown hair and green eyes she had always known, but now she could see the way plants and flowers seemed to bloom wherever she walked. "I can see it," she whispered, reaching out to touch the crystalline surface. The moment her fingers made contact, the door began to glow, and she felt a rush of knowledge flow through her. Memories that weren't quite her own but felt familiar nonetheless. She saw a woman with her face but silver hair, standing in a garden where the flowers bloomed in shades of purple and blue and deep indigo. She saw the same woman dancing beneath a sky filled with stars that moved in patterns. That spoke of ancient magic. And she saw the woman's face filled with love as she looked at a man with green eyes and dark hair who could only be a younger version of Kaelen. "Seraphina," Elara breathed, understanding flooding through her. "She's my ancestor. The Night Court's clean. She's my great-great-grandmother." "Which means you also carry the bloodline of the Spring Court," Kaelen said, his voice filled with wonder. "The magic recognizes you as kin to both courts, as someone who has the right to speak for both sides of this ancient conflict." Elara pulled her hand back from the door, but the visions continued to flow through her mind. She saw the night when the vow was made, felt the anguish that had torn through both Kaelen and Seraphina as they realized what was happening. She felt the weight of the curse as it settled over the Spring Court, and the terrible loneliness that had consumed Seraphina in her exile. "She's still alive," Elara said with certainty. "I can feel her, like an echo in my own magic. She's alive, but she's in pain. The exile hasn't just separated her from her court, it's separated her from everything that gave her life meaning." "Then we have to reach her," Kaelen said, and she could hear the determination in his voice. "We have to find a way to bring her back, to convince her to help us break the vow that has caused so much suffering." "How do we get to the void between?" Kaelen moved to another part of the chamber, where a pedestal held what looked like a compass made of silver and shadow. "This is a void compass. It can guide us through the spaces between worlds, but using it is dangerous. The void between doesn't follow the same rules as our reality. Time moves differently there. Distance is measured in thoughts and emotions rather than physical space, and the very act of existing there requires a strength of will that most beings simply don't possess. What happens to those who aren't strong enough? They become lost, scattered across the void like whispers in the wind. Their consciousness dissolves, their memories fade, and eventually they simply cease to exist in any meaningful way. Elara felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to remain calm. And if we do manage to reach Seraphina, if we convince her to help us, what then? How do we perform the ritual to break the vow? The ritual requires us to return to the place where the original vow was made, to the starlight grove at the heart of the spring court. There, with Seraphina present and willing to forgive, you would need to offer your own life force as a substitute for the curse. The magic would flow through you, using your connection to both bloodlines to untangle the vow and restore the balance between the courts. Would I survive it? Kaelin's hesitation was answer enough, but he spoke anyway. I don't know. The texts speak of transformation rather than death, but they don't specify what form that transformation might take. You might emerge from the ritual unchanged, or you might be altered in ways that make you something other than human. Or... He trailed off, unable to voice the third possibility. Or I might die, Elara finished for him. But if I don't try, if we don't break the curse, then everyone dies anyway. The spring court, the other courts, potentially both realms. It's not really a choice, is it? There's always a choice, Kaelen said softly. I won't lie to you about the risks, but I also won't force you to face them. If you want to leave, if you want to return to your own world and forget any of this ever happened, I'll help you. I'll find another way, even if it takes another 200 years. Elara looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, the way he held himself as if he were prepared for her to walk away. She thought about her quiet life in the human realm, about the small apartment and the predictable routine that had once seemed like safety. Then she thought about the magic that sang in her veins, about the way the plants responded to her touch, about the sense of rightness she felt when she was here in the Fae realm. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. We're going to find Seraphina. We're going to break this curse, and we're going to save both our worlds. But first, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that if something goes wrong, if the ritual fails, or if I don't survive it, you'll find another way to save your people. Promise me you won't let guilt or grief stop you from doing what needs to be done. Kaelin's eyes searched her face, and she could see the war between his protective instincts and his respect for her autonomy. I promise, he said finally, but I also promise that I'll do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't come to that. Good, Elara said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. The fear was still there, but it was balanced by something stronger, a sense of purpose that felt like coming home. Now, show me how to use that compass. If we're going to journey into the void between, I want to understand exactly what we're getting ourselves into. The next few hours passed in intensive preparation. Kaelen showed her how to read the void compass, how to interpret the shifting patterns of light and shadow that would guide them through the spaces between worlds. He taught her anchoring techniques, mental exercises that would help her maintain her sense of self even when reality became fluid around them. And he shared with her the protective charms and spells that might keep them safe during the journey. The most important thing to remember, he said as they practiced the anchoring meditation, is that in the void between, belief shapes reality. If you believe you're lost, you will be lost. If you believe you're weak, you will become weak. But if you believe you belong there, if you believe you have the right to exist in that space, then you can navigate it safely. What about Seraphina? If she's been there for 200 years, How has she managed to survive? She was the queen of the night court. Her connection to shadow and starlight gives her an advantage in the void, makes her more suited to existing in that space than most. But even so, the isolation will have taken its toll. We need to be prepared for the possibility that she won't be the same person I once knew. Elara nodded, filing away the information for later consideration. When do we leave? Tomorrow night. The barriers between worlds are thinnest during the new moon, and that will give us the best chance of reaching the void safely. That's not much time. No, Kaelen agreed, but it's all we have. The curse is accelerating, and I can feel my connection to the spring court's magic weakening by the hour. If we wait much longer, I won't have enough power left to make the journey. That night, Elara found herself standing in the garden outside her chambers, looking up at the star-filled sky. The night was clear, and she could see the constellation patterns that Kaelen had taught her to recognize, the star roads that connected the different realms. Tomorrow night, she would be traveling those roads, venturing into a space that existed outside of normal reality. Having second thoughts? Kaelen's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar in the darkness. "No," she said, turning to face him. "Just trying to absorb the magnitude of what we're about to do. This time tomorrow, we'll either be in the void between searching for your lost love, or we'll be dead. It's a lot to process." "She's not my lost love," Kaelen said quietly, moving to stand beside her. "She was, once. But love isn't something that can be frozen in time, unchanged by experience or circumstance. The woman I loved 200 years ago is gone, changed by exile, and suffering into someone I might not even recognize. And I'm not the same man who made that vow. I'm older, wiser in some ways, more broken in others. But you still care about her. I care about what she represented, about the future we might have had together. I care about making amends for the wrong I did her. But I also care about the present, about the future that might still be possible." He looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "I care about you, Elara. More than I probably should, given the circumstances." "The circumstances are what they are," she said softly. "We can't change the past, but we can choose how we face the future. And how do you choose to face it?" She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Together. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we find in the void between, we face it together." Kaelen's fingers tightened around hers, and she felt the warmth of his magic flowing through the connection between them. "Together," he agreed. They stood there in the garden, surrounded by the scent of night-blooming flowers and the soft whisper of wind through the leaves. The night was peaceful, but Elara could sense the tension that lay beneath the surface, the knowledge that everything was about to change. "Tell me about her," she said. "About Seraphina. If we're going to convince her to help us, I need to understand who she is, what she cares about." Kaelen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "She was fierce," he said finally. "Fierce and beautiful, and utterly uncompromising when it came to protecting her people. She had a laugh that could light up a room, and a temper that could bring down kingdoms. She was everything a queen should be: strong, wise, compassionate, and absolutely terrifying when she needed to be. You loved her very much." "I did. But I also loved the idea of her, the possibility of what we could have built together. Looking back, I wonder if I ever really knew her at all, or if I was just in love with my own dreams of the future." Elara felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, but she pushed it aside. What was she like when she wasn't being a queen? In private, when it was just the two of you. Gentle, Kaelen said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. She had this way of humming when she was concentrating on something. These little melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. And she loved to dance, especially under the stars. She used to say that dancing was the closest she could come to flying without wings. She sounds wonderful. She was. But she was also proud and stubborn and not particularly forgiving of those who wronged her. If we do manage to find her, if we convince her to help us, it won't be because she's forgiven me. It will be because she understands that the alternative is worse than her anger. Maybe, Elara said, or maybe 200 years of exile has given her perspective on what's truly important. Maybe she's learned that holding on to anger is just another kind of prison. I hope you're right, Kaelen said, but I think it's more likely that she'll try to kill me the moment she sees me. Well, Elara said with a lightness she didn't entirely feel. I suppose we'll find out soon enough. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. Kaelen gathered the supplies they would need for the journey protective amulets, provisions that would sustain them in the void, and a small arsenal of weapons that could function in a realm where the normal rules of reality didn't apply. Elara spent the time practicing the meditation techniques that would keep her anchored to her own identity, rehearsing the mental exercises that might mean the difference between survival and dissolution. As evening approached, she found herself standing in front of the mirror in her chambers, looking at her reflection with new eyes. The woman who looked back at her was still recognizably herself, but there was something different about her now. Something that spoke of power awakening and destiny accepted. Her brown hair seemed to shimmer with threads of silver, and her green eyes held depths that hadn't been there before. Are you ready? Kaelen asked from the doorway, and she turned to see him dressed in travel leathers that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He carried the void compass in one hand and a pack slung over his shoulder, and his face held the grim determination of someone who knew exactly how dangerous their journey would be. As ready as I'll ever be, Elara replied, shouldering her own pack. Let's go find your exiled queen. They made their way through the palace to a chamber she had never seen before. A circular room with walls that seemed to be made of crystallized void surfaces that reflected nothing and absorbed everything. In the center of the room was a platform carved with intricate symbols that hurt to look at Kriklash. Directly, patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when observed. This is the Void Gate, Kaelen explained, setting the compass on the platform. It will open a doorway into the space between worlds, but maintaining the connection will require most of my remaining power. Once we step through, we'll be committed to the journey. There will be no turning back until we find what we're looking for. Or until we don't, Elara said. But she was surprised to find that the prospect didn't frighten her as much as it should have. Are you sure about this? Once we leave, the spring court will be defenseless. If something happens to us, if we don't make it back, the spring court will die anyway, slowly and painfully. At least this way, we're giving everyone a chance. Kaelen placed his hands on the compass, and the symbols around the platform began to glow with a light that seemed to come from somewhere outside the visible spectrum. Stand close to me. Whatever happens, don't let go of my hand. Elara moved to stand beside him, and when his fingers closed around hers, she felt the familiar warmth of his magic flowing through the connection. But this time, there was something else, a sense of shared purpose that went beyond mere attraction or affection. They were partners in this, bound together by choice and necessity, and something deeper than either of them had words for. The air in the chamber began to thicken, and Elara felt reality start to bend around them. The walls of the room seemed to stretch, distort, and the platform beneath their feet began to dissolve into something that was neither solid nor liquid, but something else entirely. The compass in Kaelin's hand started to spin, its needle pointing toward directions that didn't exist in normal space. "Remember," Kaelin said, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Believe in yourself. Believe in your right to exist. Believe in the importance of what we're doing." And then the world fell away beneath them, and they were falling through space that wasn't space, through time that wasn't time, into a realm where the very concept of existence became fluid and negotiable. The void between was unlike anything Elara had ever experienced or imagined. It wasn't darkness, exactly, but rather an absence of light that went beyond the mere absence of photons. It was a space where color had no meaning, where distance was measured in emotions rather than miles, where the boundary between thought and reality was so thin as to be meaningless. She could feel Kaelin's hand in hers, could sense his presence beside her, but when she tried to look at him, she found that vision itself was a concept that had little relevance here. Instead, she perceived him through other senses: the warmth of his magic, the steady rhythm of his thoughts, the unwavering determination that drove him forward. "Stay close." His voice reached her through the strange medium of the void, carried not by sound waves, but by the direct connection between their minds. "Use the compass to guide us. Feel for the resonance of the night court's magic." Elara focused on the compass, though she couldn't see it in any conventional sense. Instead, she felt its presence as a point of stability in the chaos around them, its needle pulling her consciousness toward something that felt like home and heartbreak combined. The sensation was overwhelming layers of awe, memory and emotion that weren't her own flooding through her awareness like a tide of liquid starlight. She could feel Seraphina's presence now, distant but unmistakable, like a star that had been hidden behind clouds for so long that everyone had forgotten it was there. The exiled queen's magic sang through the void with a melody that was hauntingly beautiful. Utterly alone, a psalm of defiance and despair that had been echoing through the emptiness for 2 centuries. "She's this way," Elara whispered, though in the void her words took the form of silver threads that wrapped around Kaelin's consciousness, conveying meaning beyond what language could express. "She's built something here, some kind of refuge. But it's not what I expected." They moved through the non-space, guided by instinct and the pull of the compass, and gradually the emptiness around them began to take on form and substance. Not solid matter, exactly, but patterns of thought and will that had been shaped into something resembling reality. Elara realized that they were approaching a construct of pure imagination, a palace built from memory and sustained by sheer force of personality. The palace of exile rose before them like a dream made manifest, its towers reaching toward stars that existed only in Seraphina's mind. The walls were made of crystallized shadow, and the windows glowed with light that had never touched any sun. Gardens surrounded the structure, filled with flowers that bloomed in colors that had no names, their petals made of condensed emotion rather than living tissue. "Magnificent," Kaelin breathed, and Elara could feel his awe and pain intermingling as he looked upon what his beloved had created in her solitude. "She always was the most powerful of us, but this is beyond anything I thought possible." As they approached the palace gates, Figures began to emerge from the shadows. No guards, exactly, but echoes of people Seraphina had known and loved, constructs of memory given semi-solid form. Elara recognized some of them from the visions she had received through the mirror of lineage. Courtiers from the night court, servants and advisors and friends who had been lost when the exile began. The echo figures didn't try to stop them, but they watched with eyes that held depths of accusation and sorrow. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and features that spoke of ancient nobility, stepped forward and spoke in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Kaelen of the Spring Court," the echo said, and its words carried the weight of centuries of judgment. "You dare to come here, to this place of exile and suffering. You dare to seek audience with the one you betrayed?" "I come seeking redemption," Kaelen replied, his voice steady despite the pain Elara could feel radiating from him. "I come seeking to right a wrong that has poisoned both our courts for too long." "And who is this mortal child you bring with you? What gives her the right to walk in the realm of the exiled?" "I am Elara Thornwick," she said, stepping forward and letting her own power flow around her like a cloak of silver flame. "I carry the blood of both courts, the heritage of spring and night combined. I come seeking to heal what was broken, to restore what was lost." The echo figure studied her with eyes that seemed to see into the very depths of her soul. Finally, it nodded and stepped aside. "The Queen will see you," it said. "But know this, she is not the woman you once knew, Lord Kaelen. Exile changes those who endure it, shapes them into something harder and sharper than they were before. Do not expect forgiveness. Do not expect mercy." They passed through the gates and into the palace proper, walking down corridors that seemed to shift and change around them, responding to currents of emotion and memory that flowed through the structure like blood through veins. The walls were covered with tapestries that showed seams from the night court's history, great battles and celebrations, moments of triumph and tragedy, all preserved in threads of shadow and starlight. At the heart of the palace was a throne room that took Elara's breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, disappearing into depths of star-filled darkness that seemed to go on forever. The floor was made of polished obsidian that reflected not their images but their souls, showing their true natures in patterns of light and shadow. And on a throne carved from a single massive moonstone sat the woman who had haunted Kaelen's dreams for 2 centuries. Seraphina, Queen of the Night Court in exile, was both exactly what Elara had expected and completely different. She had the silver hair and midnight eyes that Elara had seen in her visions, but 200 years of solitude had carved new lines into her face. Lines that spoke of wisdom earned through suffering and strength forged in the fires of abandonment. She wore robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of night itself, and a crown of starlight rested on her brow like captured constellations. But it was her eyes that held Elara's attention, eyes that had seen too much, endured too much, remembered too much. They were the eyes of someone who had stared into the abyss so long that she had become part of it, someone who had made peace with her pain by embracing it completely. "Kaelen," Seraphina said, and her voice was like music played in a minor key, beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. "After all these years, you've finally come to see what your choices have wrought." Kaelen moved forward, and Elara could feel the weight of history pressing down on both of them like a physical force. "Seraphina, I don't." The single word cut through the air like a blade, and Kaelen stopped as if he had hit an invisible wall. "Don't you dare apologize to me. Don't you dare stand there and tell me you're sorry." As if sorry could undo 2 centuries of exile, as if sorry could restore what was lost. "Then what can I say?" Kaelen asked, and his voice was raw with emotion. "What words exist that could possibly express the depth of my regret, the magnitude of my mistake?" "None," Seraphina said simply. "There are no words, Kaelen. There is only the choice you made and the consequences that followed. You chose to believe lies over love, chose fear over faith, chose to sacrifice me and my people for a promise of security that was nothing more than an elaborate deception." "I know," Kaelen said. "I know, and I've lived with that knowledge every day since the vow was sealed. I've watched my court slowly die, felt my own power diminish, knowing that it was all for nothing, that Theron played me like a piece on a game board. And now you come to me, seeking what? Absolution? Forgiveness? The chance to ease your conscience before the curse finally claims you?" "I come seeking a way to break the vow," Kaelen said. "I come seeking to restore what was lost, to give you back your court and your people." Seraphina's laugh was like broken glass, sharp and glittering and dangerous. "My court is gone, Kaelen, scattered to the winds when the exile began. My people are dead, or worse, changed beyond recognition by their exposure to the chaos between worlds. There is nothing left to restore." "That's not true," Elara said, speaking for the first time since they had entered the throne room. "The magic remembers. The connections between you and your people, between your court and the greater pattern of reality, they've been severed, but they haven't been destroyed. If we can break the vow, if we can undo the exile, then those connections can be restored." Seraphina's gaze shifted to Elara, and she felt the full weight of the exiled queen's attention. It was like being examined by a force of nature, assessed and measured by standards that mortal minds could barely comprehend. "And you are?" "Elara Thornwick. I carry the bloodlines of both spring and night, the heritage that might be able to break the vow that binds you here." "Might be able to," Seraphina repeated, her tone mocking. "How refreshing to encounter such certainty. Tell me, child, do you have any idea what you're proposing? Do you understand the forces you would be attempting to manipulate?" "I understand that people are suffering," Elara said, meeting the queen's gaze without flinching. "I understand that the curse is spreading, that it threatens not just the spring court, but the balance between all the realms. And I understand that you're the only one who can help us stop it." "Help you," Seraphina said, rising from her throne with fluid grace. As she moved, shadows seemed to flow around her like living things, responding to her emotions with an intimacy that spoke of long practice. "Help the man who betrayed me, who cast me into exile, who destroyed everything I had spent centuries building. Why would I do such a thing?" "Because you're better than your pain," Elara said simply. "Because somewhere beneath all that anger and hurt, you're still the queen who fought to protect both courts, who believed in the possibility of peace between shadow and light." Seraphina's eyes flashed with something that might have been fury or might have been surprise. "You know nothing about me, child. Nothing about what I've endured, what I've become in this place between worlds." "I know that you loved him," Elara said, nodding toward Kaelen. "I know that you built this palace not just as a refuge, but as a monument to what you lost. I know that every flower in your gardens, every tapestry on your walls, every echo figure that serves you is a memory you refuse to let go of, because letting go would mean accepting that it was all meaningless." "Elara," Kaelen warned, but she pressed on. I know, because I can feel it, she continued. The magic that flows through both our bloodlines, it connects us. I can sense the depth of your pain, but I can also sense the love that still exists beneath it. You haven't forgiven him, and maybe you never will, but you still care about the people who will suffer if this curse continues to spread. Seraphina stared at her for a long moment, and Elara could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on them all. When the exiled queen finally spoke, her voice was softer, less sharp-edged than before. Even if what you say is true, even if I were willing to help you attempt this ritual, the price would be enormous. Breaking a vow sealed with blood and starlight requires a sacrifice of equal magnitude. Are you prepared to pay that price? If it means saving both our courts, if it means ending the suffering that has gone on for too long, then yes, I'm prepared. Death is not the only price the magic might demand, Seraphina said. You could be transformed beyond recognition, stripped of your humanity, turned into something that exists purely to serve the balance between the courts. You could lose everything that makes you who you are. And if I don't try, if we leave things as they are, then the curse continues to spread, the spring court dies, and eventually the imbalance destroys the barriers between all the realms. Chaos, destruction, the end of everything we've fought to protect. Seraphina moved closer, and Elara could smell the scent of night-blooming flowers and distant stars that clung to her like perfume. At least your sacrifice would have meaning. Then you'll help us? Seraphina looked between Elara and Kaelen, and for a moment the mask of cold authority slipped, revealing the pain and longing that lay beneath. I will help you attempt the ritual, she said finally. Not for him, not for forgiveness or redemption, or any of the pretty words that might make this easier to bear. I will help because you're right, I am still, despite everything, a queen. And a queen protects her people, even when those people have forgotten she exists. Seraphina, Kaelen began, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't thank me yet, she said. The ritual is complex and dangerous, and there are preparations that must be made. First, we must return to the physical realm, to the Starlight Grove where the original vow was sealed. Then we must gather the components needed to undo 2 centuries of magical binding. And finally, we must hope that the powers that witness such things will accept the sacrifice when it is offered. How do we get back? Elara asked. The void gate that brought us here is no longer an option, Seraphina finished. Using it again so soon would drain what remains of Kaelen's power, leaving him too weak to participate in the ritual. But there are other ways to travel between realms, paths that I have learned to walk during my years of exile. She led them from the throne room to a balcony that overlooked the impossible gardens of her palace. In the distance, Elara could see roads of silver light stretching away into the darkness, connecting her realm to other pockets of existence scattered throughout the void. The star roads, Seraphina explained. They exist in the spaces between thoughts, the gaps between one moment and the next. Dangerous to travel for those who don't understand their nature, but they offer a way to move between realms without depleting one's magical reserves. How long will it take us to reach the Spring Court? Kaelen asked. Time moves differently on the star roads. The journey might take minutes or days, depending on the currents of magic that flow through them. But we should arrive with enough time to complete the preparations for the ritual. Seraphina raised her hand, and one of the silver roads began to descend toward the balcony, its surface rippling like liquid mercury. Step carefully, she warned. The roads respond to intention and will. think of where you want to go. Hold that destination firmly in your mind, and let the magic carry you forward." They stepped onto the star road together, and immediately, Elara felt herself caught up in a current of pure possibility. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced in the void proper instead of the disorienting absence of reality. This was movement through layers of existence, glimpses of other worlds and other possibilities flashing past like scenery seen from a speeding train. She saw versions of herself making different choices, timelines where she had never left the human realm, realities where the curse had never been cast in the first place. She saw Kaelen and Seraphina as they had been before the betrayal, young and in love and full of hope for the future they would build together. And she saw the potential futures that lay ahead of them, some bright with promise, others dark with failure and loss. "Don't look too closely at the alternatives." Seraphina's voice reached her through the flow of images. "The star roads show what might be, not what is. Focus on the present, on the choice you've made, and the path you're walking." Elara closed her eyes and focused on the feeling of the spring court's magic, on the warmth of Kaelen's hand in hers, on the steady presence of Seraphina beside them. Gradually, the cascade of possibilities faded, replaced by a sense of forward movement that felt purposeful and directed. When she opened her eyes again, they were standing in the starlight grove at the heart of the spring court's palace. The ancient trees towered around them, their leaves whispering with secrets older than recorded history. In the center of the grove was a circle of standing stones, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. "The binding circle," Kaelen said, his voice heavy with memory. "This is where I made the vow that changed everything." Elara could feel the lingering traces of that ancient magic, like echoes of a song that had been playing for so long, it had become part of the background noise of reality. But she could also sense something else, a wrongness, a discord that spoke of the curse's influence spreading even into this sacred space. "The ritual must be performed at midnight," Seraphina said, moving to examine the standing stones, "when the barriers between worlds are at their thinnest and the ancient powers are most likely to hear our petition. That gives us several hours to prepare." "What do we need to do?" Elara asked. "First, we must cleanse the binding circle of the curse's influence. The stones must be purified, the symbols restored to their original meaning. Then you must be prepared for the role you will play, the willing sacrifice who offers her life force to break the vow." "And if the ritual fails?" Seraphina looked at her with eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. "If the ritual fails, then the curse will be strengthened by the attempt to break it. The spring court will die within a matter of days, and the imbalance will spread to the other realms like a plague. Everything we have fought to protect will be lost." "No pressure, then," Elara said with a weak attempt at humor. "Pressure is good," Kaelen said, moving to stand beside her. "It means the stakes are high enough to matter. It means that what we're doing has the potential to change everything." They spent the next several hours in preparation, each of them focusing on their role in the ritual to come. Seraphina worked to cleanse the binding circle, her magic flowing through the ancient stones like silver water, washing away the accumulated taint of 2 centuries of cursed power. Kaelen gathered the ritual components they would need: rare herbs and precious stones, vials of water from sacred springs, and other materials that would help focus and direct the magical energies. Elara, meanwhile, prepared herself for the sacrifice that lay ahead. She meditated in the center of the grove, feeling the magic of both courts flowing through her bloodline, understanding for the first time the true scope of what she was about to attempt. The ritual would require her to become a conduit for forces that could easily destroy her. to channel energies that were meant to flow between realms rather than through mortal flesh. As midnight approached, she found herself thinking not of death or transformation, but of the garden she had tended in the human realm. She remembered the satisfaction of coaxing life from reluctant soil, the joy of watching seedlings grow into flourishing plants under her care. In a way, what she was about to do was similar. She was planting seeds of change in the magical soil of reality, trusting that something beautiful would grow from the sacrifice. "Are you ready?" Kaelen asked, and she looked up to see him standing at the edge of the binding circle. He had changed into robes of deep green silk, and his face was painted with symbols that glowed with their own inner light. Beside him, Seraphina wore robes of midnight blue, her silver hair crowned with a circlet of stars. "I'm ready," Elara said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. The fear was still there, but it was balanced by something stronger, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. She walked to the center of the binding circle, feeling the ancient stones respond to her presence. The symbols carved into their surfaces began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Around the circle's edge, Kaelen and Seraphina took their positions, their combined magic creating a web of power that would contain and direct the forces they were about to unleash. "Elara Thornwick," Seraphina said, her voice carrying the authority of centuries. "Do you willingly offer yourself as sacrifice to break the vow that binds the Night Court to exile?" "I do," Elara replied, her voice clear and strong. "Kaelen of the Spring Court," Seraphina continued, "do you willingly release the vow you made 2 centuries ago, accepting whatever consequences may follow?" "I do," Kaelen said, and Elara could hear the weight of Teed, regret and hope in his words. "Then let the ritual begin." Seraphina began to sing, her voice weaving through harmonies that seemed to come from the stars themselves. The magic responded to her call, flowing down from the night sky like liquid silver, pooling around the binding circle in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Kaelen added his own power to the working, his magic rising from the earth beneath their feet, green and gold and vibrant with the life force of the Spring Court. And in the center of it all, Elara felt herself becoming something more than human. The magic flowed through her, reshaping her at the most fundamental level, transforming her from a simple conduit into a living bridge between the realms. She could feel her connection to both bloodlines strengthening, the heritage of spring and night awakening fully within her for the first time. The vow that had bound Seraphina to exile was visible now, a chain of silver and shadow that stretched from the binding circle into the spaces between worlds. It pulsed with malevolent energy, fed by 2 centuries of pain and separation, grown strong on the suffering it had caused. "Now," Seraphina commanded, and Elara reached out with her transformed consciousness, grasping the chain that represented the vow. The moment she touched it, agony beyond description flooded through her being. The vow fought against her touch, recognizing her as a threat to its continued existence. But she held on, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The chain began to crack, hairline fractures of light appearing along its length. With each break, Elara felt pieces of herself being torn away, consumed by the magic she was channeling. But she also felt something else, the barriers between the realms beginning to heal, the balance between spring and night being restored. "Hold on." Kaelen's voice reached her through the chaos of magical forces. "Just a little longer." The final link in the chain shattered with a sound like thunder, and the accumulated power of the broken vow exploded outward in all directions. Elara felt herself lifted up and torn apart, her consciousness scattered across multiple levels of reality as the transformation reached its climax. For a moment that lasted forever, she existed in a state beyond physical form, beyond individual identity. She was the connection between spring and night, the bridge between shadow and light, the living embodiment of balance restored. She could see the night court reforming around Seraphina, her people returning from their scattered exile as the magical bonds that had held them apart dissolved. She could see the spring court's gardens blooming with renewed vitality, the curse that had slowly poisoned them finally lifted. And then, she was falling back into herself, back into a body that felt different but familiar, back into an identity that had been fundamentally changed by what she had experienced. She opened eyes that now held flecks of silver among the green, and looked up to see Kaelen and Seraphina standing over her with expressions of wonder and relief. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the strain of the ritual. "It worked," Seraphina said, and for the first time since they had met, her smile was genuine and warm. "The vow is broken, the exile is ended, and both our courts are free." Elara sat up slowly, testing her transformed body. She felt different, stronger in some ways, more connected to the magical currents that flowed between the realms. But she was still herself, still human despite the changes the ritual had wrought. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Kaelen said, helping her to her feet, "we rebuild. We restore what was lost, heal what was broken, and work to ensure that such a betrayal never happens again." "And us?" Elara looked between him and Seraphina, uncertain about where she fit into the complex relationship between the two rulers. Seraphina studied her for a long moment, then looked at Kaelen with an expression that was hard to read. "The woman I was 200 years ago loved you with everything she had," she said to him. "But that woman is gone, changed by exile and suffering into someone different. I don't know if I can love you again, Kaelen. I don't know if I want to try." Kaelen nodded, and Elara could see that he had expected as much. "I understand. What we had was beautiful, but it belongs to the past. We can't build a future on the foundation of what used to be. But we can build a future on what is," Seraphina said, turning to Elara. "You've proven yourself worthy of respect from both courts, shown that it's possible to bridge the gap between spring and night. Perhaps it's time for a new kind of alliance, one based not on romantic love, but on mutual understanding and shared purpose." Elara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, one she hadn't even realized she was carrying. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like to help build something new, something better than what came before." "Then that's what we'll do," Kaelen said, and she could hear the hope in his voice. "We'll build a future worthy of the sacrifice you made to give it to us." As dawn broke over the spring court, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Elara stood in the starlight grove and felt the magic of both courts flowing through her transformed being. She was no longer entirely human, but she was still herself. She was changed, but not diminished. Most importantly, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The curse was broken, the exile was ended, and the future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten song, full of possibility and promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would have to overcome, they would face them together, spring and night united at last, balanced by the bridge that Elara had chosen to become. In the garden of her new life, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in colors that had no names, Elara Thornwick smiled and knew that she was finally, truly home. 3 months had passed since the breaking of the ancient vow, and the transformation of both courts continued to unfold in ways none of them had anticipated. Elara found herself at the center of a delicate web of politics and magic, serving as an ambassador between realms that were still learning to trust each other again after centuries of separation. The Night Court had indeed reformed around Seraphina, her scattered people returning from their exile with stories of survival that defied imagination. Some had found refuge in pocket dimensions, others had made homes in the spaces between stars, and a few had even taken mortal form and lived hidden lives in the human realm. Their reunion was joyous but complex, as many bore scars from their long separation that would take time to heal. Elara walked through the twilight gardens that had sprung up at the border between the Spring and Night Courts, a space that existed in perpetual sunset where flowers of both realms grew side by side. Her daily rounds had become a ritual of sorts, checking on the delicate balance that her transformation had made possible. The silver threads in her hair caught the amber light, and she could feel the magic of both courts responding to her presence like a gentle symphony. "The moonbell vines are spreading faster than expected," she murmured to herself, kneeling beside a patch where the Night Court's luminescent flowers had begun to intertwine with the Spring Court's climbing roses. The combination should have been impossible, but somehow the plants had found a way to coexist, their roots sharing nutrients while their blooms complemented each other's beauty. "They're not the only ones adapting quickly." Kaelen's voice came from behind her, warm with fondness. He approached through the garden path, his step lighter than it had been in centuries. The restoration of his court's magic had brought color back to his cheeks and strength back to his bearing, though the experience had also left him more thoughtful, more careful with the weight of authority he carried. "The border settlements are thriving," Elara agreed, straightening to face him. "Your people and Seraphina's are finding common ground in ways I never expected. The night workers helping with the spring planting, the day folk sharing their preservation techniques for the winter stores. It's beautiful to watch." "It's what you made possible," Kaelen said, moving closer until they stood side by side among the impossible garden. "Your sacrifice didn't just break the vow, it created something entirely new. A breach between worlds that allows for cooperation instead of mere coexistence." Elara felt the familiar flutter in her chest that came whenever he looked at her like that, as if she were something precious and miraculous. Their relationship had evolved in the months since the ritual, growing from desperate alliance to deep friendship to something that might, eventually, become love. But they were both careful with their hearts, mindful of the complexity of their situation and the responsibilities they bore. "Speaking of cooperation," she said, pulling a folded letter from her pocket, "I received word from the Autumn Court today. Lord Aldrich wants to meet with us about establishing formal trade agreements. It seems news of our success has spread to all the courts." Kaelen's expression grew thoughtful. "That's good news, but we'll need to be careful. The Autumn Court has always been the most traditional, the most resistant to change. If Aldrich is reaching out, it means he sees advantage in what we've built. But it also means he'll be looking for ways to turn that advantage to his benefit." "What about the Winter Court? Any word from Queen Morwen?" Silence, as usual. "The Winter Court keeps its own council, but my spies report increased activity along their borders. They're watching, waiting to see how our alliance develops before they commit to any course of action." A rustle in the nearby bushes caught their attention, and moments later Seraphina emerged from the shadow paths that connected different parts of the garden. She moved with the fluid grace that marked her as a creature of night and starlight, but her expression was troubled. "We have visitors," she announced without preamble. A delegation from the human realm, led by someone who claims to have urgent business with our bridgewalker. Elara felt a chill run down her spine. In the months since the ritual, she had deliberately avoided contact with her former world, unsure how to explain her transformation or her new role. Did they give their names? The leader introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Webb, from something called the Department of Occult Research. He says he's been tracking magical disturbances that originated from our realm, and he wants answers. Kaelin's hand moved instinctively to the sword at his side. How many in the delegation? 6, but they're not soldiers. Scholars, by the look of them, with instruments I don't recognize. They're waiting in the neutral grove under a flag of truce, but their presence here is concerning. Elara closed her eyes, reaching out with her transformed senses to feel the magical currents around the courts. There she could sense them now, a cluster of human minds radiating curiosity and determination, and barely contained fear. One of them felt familiar, a signature she recognized from her old life. "I know him," she said, opening her eyes. "Dr. Webb. He was a professor at the university where I worked. He always suspected there was more to the botanical anomalies I studied than conventional science could explain." "Then this isn't a coincidence," Seraphina said. "He's been looking for you specifically." "What do you want to do?" Kaelen asked, his voice carefully neutral. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the protective instincts that made him want to shield her from any threat to her safety or happiness. "I need to talk to them," Elara said, though the thought filled her with anxiety. If the Department of Occult Research is real, if they've been tracking our activities, then pretending they don't exist won't make them go away. Better to meet with them openly, try to understand what they want. "We'll come with you," Seraphina said, and it wasn't a request. "If these humans pose any threat to the balance we've worked to build, we need to know about it." They made their way through the garden paths to the neutral grove, a circular clearing where representatives from different realms could meet under the protection of ancient laws that forbade violence or deception. The grove was marked by 7 standing stones, each one representing one of the major realms, though the 7th stone representing the realm that had been lost in the Great War centuries ago stood cracked and dark. The human delegation was waiting exactly as Seraphina had described. 6 individuals in practical clothing carrying cases of equipment that hummed with unfamiliar energy. Dr. Webb stood at their center, a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When he saw Elara approaching, his face lit up with a mixture of relief and scientific curiosity. "Elara Thornwick," he said, stepping forward with his hands spread in a gesture of peace. "When you disappeared 3 months ago, we feared the worst. Your apartment was found undisturbed, but you had simply vanished without a trace. The botanical specimens you had been studying showed unprecedented levels of magical resonance, and then the readings spiked beyond anything your instruments could measure," Elara finished, studying his face for signs of hostility or hidden agenda. "I'm sorry for worrying you, Marcus, but I had no way to send word. Where have you been? What happened to you?" His gaze took in her transformed appearance, the silver threads in her hair, the otherworldly grace of her movements, the way shadows and light seemed to bend around her presence. "You're different. The energy readings we're getting from you are unlike anything in our databases." "I've been here," she said simply, gesturing to the magical realm around them. "Learning who I really am, discovering a heritage I never knew existed. These are my friends, and Kaelen, Lord of the Spring Court, and Seraphina, Queen of the Night Court." Dr. Webb's team exchanged glances, and she could see them trying to process the implications of what she was telling them. One of them, a young woman with dark hair, raised a hand tentatively. Dr. Thornwick, our instruments have detected massive fluctuations in the dimensional barriers over the past 3 months. Energy patterns consistent with major magical workings. Reality distortions that briefly destabilized the boundary between our world and wherever this is. Were you involved in those events? Elara felt Kaelen and Seraphina tense beside her, ready to defend her if necessary. But she sensed no immediate threat from the humans, only a desperate hunger for understanding that she recognized from her own academic past. I was, she admitted. We broke an ancient curse that had been poisoning the magical balance between realms. The distortions you detected were side effects of that working. A curse? Dr. Webb leaned forward, his scholarly instincts overriding any sense of caution. What kind of curse? How was it structured? The energy signatures suggest a binding of unprecedented complexity. The kind of curse that could have destroyed both our worlds if left unchecked, Seraphina interjected, her voice carrying a subtle note of warning. The kind that required great sacrifice to break. Dr. Webb's gaze sharpened as he looked at Elara again. You were the sacrifice, weren't you? The focal point for the working. That's why you've changed. Why the energy patterns around you are so extraordinary. I chose to be, Elara said, keeping her voice steady. The question is, why does the Department of Occult Research care? What is it you really want from me? The teen leader exchanged a look with Dr. Webb, then stepped forward. She was a severe-looking woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. I'm Director Sarah Chen, and I'll be direct with you, Dr. Thornwick. For the past century, my department has monitored the barriers between our world and the magical realms. Our job is to maintain the stability of those barriers and prevent incursions that could threaten human civilization. Incursions? Kaelen's voice was carefully controlled, but Elara could feel the anger building beneath his diplomatic facade. Is that what you call it when we try to heal the damage caused by centuries of conflict? We call it what it is, a potential threat to millions of innocent people. Director Chen replied without flinching. The magical disturbances you've caused have already begun affecting the human realm. Electronic systems failing near dimensional weak points, weather patterns disrupted, people reporting visions and experiences they can't explain. If this continues to escalate, it won't, Elara said firmly. The curse is broken. The magical balance is restored. The distortions should fade as the realms settle into their new equilibrium. Should, Director Chen repeated. But you can't guarantee it, can you? You've fundamentally altered the relationship between our worlds without considering the consequences for those of us who have to live with the results. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. In their desperation to break the curse, they had focused on the immediate crisis without fully considering the broader implications. Elara felt a familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. You're right, she admitted. We acted out of necessity, but we should have considered the impact on the human realm. What do you propose we do about it? Director Chen studied her for a long moment, clearly evaluating her sincerity. We propose a formal accord, she said finally. Official recognition of the magical realms by our government, establishment of diplomatic channels, and most importantly, advance warning before any major magical workings that could affect our world. In exchange for what? Seraphina asked, her tone skeptical. Protection, Dr. Webb said. There are forces in the human realm that would see the magical realms as targets for conquest or exploitation. Corporate interests, military factions, individuals who would use your magic for their own gain without regard for the consequences. The department exists partly to prevent such abuses. Elara felt the weight of decision pressing down on her once again. The magical realms had existed in secrecy for so long that the idea of formal contact with human governments was both thrilling and terrifying. But she could also see the wisdom in it. Better to have official channels for communication than to let fear and misunderstanding drive both sides toward conflict. "This isn't a decision I can make alone," she said. "Such an accord would need the approval of all the courts, and there are politics involved that you don't understand." "We're prepared to wait," Director Chen said, "and to negotiate in good faith, but we also need assurances that no more reality-shaking magical workings will be performed without warning." Distortions caused by breaking your curse came dangerously close to triggering a cascade failure that could have collapsed the barriers entirely. Kaelen and Seraphina exchanged a look that spoke of rapid mental communication. Finally, Seraphina nodded slightly. "We can agree to advance consultation for major workings," Kaelen said carefully. "But we cannot allow human oversight of our internal affairs. The courts must remain sovereign in their own realms." "Understood," Director Chen replied. "We're not interested in conquest or control, only in preventing disasters that could affect both our peoples." "Then let's talk terms," Elara said, feeling a familiar thrill at the prospect of building bridges between worlds. "But not here, not in a single meeting. This kind of accord will take time to develop properly." "Agreed. We can establish a regular schedule of meetings, perhaps monthly to start, and Dr. Thornwick." Director Chen paused, her expression softening slightly. "Your university position is still open, if you ever want to return. Your research was brilliant, and we could use someone with your expertise and connections to help manage this new relationship." Elara felt a pang of nostalgia for her old life, but it was tempered by the certainty that her place was here, in the magical realms where she could do the most good. "Thank you, but my work is here now. Though I'd be happy to serve as a liaison when needed." The meeting concluded with tentative agreements and scheduled follow-ups. But as the human delegation prepared to leave, Dr. Webb lingered behind. "Elara," he said quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing. The forces you're dealing with, the responsibilities you've taken on, they're enormous. And there are things stirring in the human realm. Political movements and corporate interests that won't be satisfied with simple diplomatic solutions." "What kind of things?" she asked, feeling a chill of premonition. "The kind that see magic as a resource to be harvested, a power to be controlled. We've kept them in check so far, but if they learn about the extent of your transformation, about the role you play in maintaining the balance between realms, he shook his head. "Just be careful. The world is changing, and not everyone will welcome the changes you represent." As the humans departed through the portal that would return them to their own realm, Elara stood in the neutral grove, feeling the weight of new challenges settling around her like storm clouds. The curse was broken, the courts were healing, but it seemed that their greatest trials might still lie ahead. "Troubled thoughts?" Seraphina asked, moving to stand beside her. "Doctor, Webb is right, we've changed everything. And there will be those who want to control those changes for their own benefit, both in the human realm and here. Then we'll face them as we face the curse," Kaelen said, his hand finding hers with familiar warmth. "Together. The bridge you've become doesn't just connect our courts, it connects all of us to a future worth fighting for." Elara squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the contact. Around them, the impossible garden continued to bloom, night flowers and day blossoms growing side by side in defiance of natural law. It was a symbol of what they had built together, proof that different worlds could not only coexist but thrive in combination. Whatever, challenges lay ahead, Whatever forces sought to disrupt the balance they had fought so hard to achieve, she knew they would meet them as they had everything else, with courage, with wisdom, and with the unshakable belief that love and understanding could triumph over fear and hatred. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape, and in the garden of their new world, surrounded by friends who had become family and magic that sang in harmony with her transformed soul, Elara Thornwick knew that she was exactly where she belonged. 2 weeks after the meeting with the human delegation, the first crisis came not from the human realm but from within the Fae courts themselves. Elara was deep in meditation in the crystal caverns beneath the spring court when the emergency bells began to ring, their crystalline voices carrying alarm across all the interconnected realms. She emerged from the caverns to find chaos erupting in the courtyard. Fae soldiers in the colors of the autumn court had appeared without warning, their bronze armor gleaming with hostile enchantments. At their head rode Lord Aldrich himself, his copper hair flowing like liquid fire and his amber eyes burning with an intensity that spoke of barely controlled rage. "Where is the abomination?" Aldrich's voice boomed across the courtyard, his words carrying enough magical force to crack the nearby fountain. "Where is the creature that dares to call itself a bridge between courts, while corrupting the very essence of what we are?" Kaelen appeared at Elara's side, his own power rising in response to the threat. "Lord Aldrich, you come to my court bearing weapons and speaking insults. Explain yourself, or depart." "Your court?" Aldrich's laugh was bitter as autumn wind. "You mean the mongrel realm you've created with your Shadow Queen and your human pet? Look around you, Kaelen. Look at what you've built and tell me it's natural." Elara followed his gesture and saw what he meant. The courtyard had indeed changed since the breaking of the vow, but she had thought the changes beautiful. Plants from both spring and night courts grew in impossible harmony, their leaves shifting between green and silver depending on the angle of light. The very air shimmered with merged magics, creating auroras that danced between the buildings even in daylight. "It's evolution," she said, stepping forward despite Kaelen's protective gesture. "It's what happens when artificial barriers are removed and natural connections are allowed to flourish." "Natural?" Aldrich's attention fixed on her with laser intensity. "You call this natural? You're not even fully human anymore, are you, girl? I can smell the transformation on you, can see the way reality bends around your presence. You're a walking violation of the fundamental laws that govern our existence. The only laws being violated here are those of hospitality." Seraphina's voice cut through the tension as she materialized from shadow, her own honor guard flanking her in perfect formation. "You come armed into allied territory and threaten one under our protection. This is not the behavior of a civilized court." "Civilized?" Aldrich turned his burning gaze on the Night Queen. "You speak of civilization while harboring an agent of chaos." "The reports reaching the Autumn Court describe reality storms, temporal anomalies, and magical cancers spreading outward from this abomination you've created." Elara felt ice form in her veins. "What reports? What are you talking about?" One of Aldrich's lieutenants produced a crystal sphere that pulsed with recorded magical signatures. As it activated, images formed in the air above its swaths of forest, where the trees grew in impossible spirals, lakes where the water flowed upward into pillars of liquid light, meadows where flowers bloomed and died in accelerated cycles that compressed seasons into heartbeats. "The corruption spreads," Aldrich said, his voice heavy with accusation. "Every day, more of the natural world falls victim to the instability you've introduced. Villages evacuated, entire ecosystems thrown into chaos, and at the center of it all you. Elara stared at the images with growing horror. She had known there would be consequences to the ritual, had accepted the possibility of her own transformation, but she had never imagined it could affect the world on such a scale. "How far has it spread?" Seraphina asked, her voice tight with concern. "Beyond the borders of 3 courts and growing," Aldrich replied. "The Winter Queen has sealed her realm entirely, afraid the contamination will reach her domain. The Summer Court is mobilizing their war mages to contain the spread. And the human realm." He gestured, and new images appeared: cities where electronic devices failed randomly, forests where tourists reported seeing impossible things, weather patterns that defied all prediction. "This is what you've unleashed," Aldrich continued, his anger now tempered with something that might have been grief. "In your selfish desire to play God with forces beyond your understanding, you've begun the unraveling of everything that makes our world stable." Kaelin's hand found Elara's shoulder, his touch warm with support even as she felt her heart breaking. "Aldrich, if what you say is true, then we need to work together to find a solution. Accusations and threats won't help anyone." "The solution is obvious," Aldrich said coldly. "Remove the source of the contamination. Reverse the ritual that created this monster. Send her back to her own realm, and seal the barriers more tightly than ever before." "She's not a monster." Kaelin's voice carried a note of warning. "And the ritual can't be reversed without destroying both courts and everyone in them. Then perhaps that's a price worth paying to save the rest of existence from her influence." The words hung in the air like a curse, and Elara felt the weight of countless lives pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of all the people she had met in both courts, of the children who played in the merged gardens, of the refugees from the Night Court who had finally found homes again. Could she really be responsible for threatening all of that? "There has to be another way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some way to stabilize the changes without destroying what we've built." "Is there?" Aldrich's amber eyes bore into hers. "Are you certain enough of that to stake the existence of multiple realms on your hope?" Before anyone could answer, the air around them began to shimmer with an otherworldly cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Frost formed on the ground despite the warm afternoon sun, and the very atmosphere seemed to crystallize into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Enough. The single word carried absolute authority, and everyone in the courtyard, Fey lords and common soldiers alike, dropped to one knee in involuntary submission. Queen Morwen of the Winter Court stepped through the ice portal she had created, her presence bringing order to the chaos through sheer force of will. The Winter Queen was ancient beyond measure, her beauty carved from glacier ice and starlight. Her hair fell in waves of white so pure it seemed to absorb color from everything around it, and her eyes held the depth of Arctic nights. She wore robes that seemed to be cut from winter itself, and where she walked, delicate flowers of frost bloomed and shattered in her wake. "Lady Morwen," Kaelin managed, still struggling against the compulsion that kept him kneeling. "Your Majesty honors us with your presence." "Honor?" Morwen's voice was like wind through ice caves, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "I come not to honor, but to prevent catastrophe. The instabilities Lord Aldrich describes are real, and they approach the borders of my realm with each passing hour." She turned her attention to Elara, and being the focus of that ancient gaze was like standing in the path of an avalanche. "You are the bridge walker, the one who broke the ancient vow and set these forces in motion." "I am," Elara said, forcing herself to meet those terrible eyes. "But I never intended for this to happen. We were trying to heal, not to harm." "Intention is irrelevant," Morwen replied. What matters is consequence, and the consequence of your actions threatens the fundamental structure of reality. The question is not whether you meant harm, but whether you possess the wisdom and power to undo what you have done. Can it be undone? Seraphina asked, rising from her own enforced genuflection now that Morwen's attention had shifted. Possibly, but the cost would be severe. Morwen gestured, and the air filled with diagrams of magical force that showed the interconnections between all the quartz. At the center of the web was a blazing point of light that could only represent Elara. The Bridgewalker has become a nexus point, a place where the natural barriers between realms have been permanently dissolved. To restore stability, that nexus would need to be redirected. What does that mean? Elara asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. It means exile, Morwen said bluntly. Not to the void between, but to the deep wild, the space that exists at the heart of all forests, beyond the reach of any court's influence. There, your transformed nature would be absorbed by the primal forces that existed before civilization, before courts, before the need for boundaries between realms. That's not exile, Aldrich said grimly. That's Daoshan. The deep wild doesn't distinguish between consciousness and raw magic. It consumes everything equally. Not everything, Morwen corrected. Those who surrender themselves willingly to the deep wild can sometimes find a form of continued existence, becoming one with the primal forces that shape all life. But the person they were ceases to exist in any meaningful way. Elara felt the courtyard spinning around her as the full implication sank in. She had saved both courts by accepting transformation, only to discover that her very existence now threatened everything she had fought to protect. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. There must be alternatives, Kaelen said desperately. Some other way to stabilize the magical currents without sacrificing Elara. Perhaps, Morwen acknowledged. But they would require research, experimentation, and time that we may not have. The instabilities are accelerating, and my seers predict complete cascade failure within a fortnight if nothing is done. Then we research quickly, Seraphina said with fierce determination. We call upon every sage, every scholar, every expert in magical theory from all the courts. If there's a solution to be found, we'll find it. And if we don't? Elara asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. If they couldn't find another way, she would have to make the ultimate sacrifice, not just her human life, but her very existence as an individual consciousness. She would become part of the deep wild, her memories and personality dissolved into the primal magic that sustained all life. I need time to think, she said finally. Time to consider the options and prepare for whatever choice has to be made. Time is a luxury we cannot afford, Aldrich warned. Every day we delay, more of the natural world falls victim to the chaos. Then we don't delay, Elara said, her voice gaining strength as her resolve crystallized. We research, we explore every possibility, and we prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. But we do it together, all the courts working in concert instead of pointing fingers and assigning blame. Morwen studied her with those ancient eyes, and for a moment something that might have been approval flickered in their depths. You speak wisely for one so young and so changed. Very Wee Lai will contribute the resources of the Winter Court to this effort. But know this, if no alternative is found, If the cascade failure begins, I will not hesitate to act unilaterally to protect my people." "Understood," Elara said, though the words tasted like ashes. "But I pray it doesn't come to that." As the various delegations dispersed to begin their frantic research, Elara found herself alone in the garden with Kaelen and Seraphina. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the impossible plants, and she could see now what she had missed before: the subtle signs of instability in the way light bent around certain flowers, the slight wrongness in the patterns of growth that spoke of forces not quite in balance. "We'll find another way," Kaelen said fiercely, taking her hands in his. "I won't lose you, not after everything we've been through." "You might not have a choice," Elara replied gently. "And if it comes to that, if I have to go to the deep wild to save everyone else, I need you to promise me you'll let me go." "No." The word came out flat and final. "I made one sacrifice based on duty and fear, and it led to centuries of suffering. I won't make that mistake again." "This is different," she said. "This isn't about fear or manipulation. This is about accepting responsibility for the consequences of our choices." "Our choices," Seraphina repeated thoughtfully. "The ritual required all three of us: your sacrifice, Kaelin's release of the vow, and my forgiveness. If the instabilities are connected to that working, then perhaps the solution requires all three of us as well." Elara felt a spark of hope kindle in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe the problem isn't that you've become a nexus point, but that you've become an isolated one. The ritual made you a bridge between spring and night, but what if you need to become a bridge between all the courts? What if the solution is expansion rather than elimination?" Kaelin's eyes widened with understanding. "A grand alliance. Not just cooperation between courts, but actual magical integration. If all the courts contributed their essence to stabilizing Elara's transformation, the energy load would be distributed," Seraphina finished. "Instead of one person bearing the weight of all that magical force, it would be shared among multiple nexus points, each one anchored by their court's power." It was a radical idea, unprecedented in the history of the Fey courts. The courts had always maintained their independence, their separate identities and spheres of influence. To integrate them magically would fundamentally change the nature of Fey society. "Would it work?" Elara asked. "I don't know," Seraphina admitted. "But it's a possibility worth exploring, and it's certainly preferable to watching you dissolve into primal magic." "The other courts would never agree to it," Kaelen said, though his voice held more hope than conviction. "The level of trust required, the surrender of autonomy." "They might," Elara said slowly, "if the alternative is a total collapse. And if we can prove that integration strengthens rather than weakens their individual powers, then that's what we research," Seraphina decided. "Integration theory, magical load distribution, nexus point multiplication. We have the greatest magical minds of all the courts to draw upon. Surely someone has explored these concepts before." As they began to plan their research strategy, Elara felt the weight of her burden shifting slightly. She was still the focal point of a crisis that threatened multiple realms, still facing the possibility of losing everything she had become. But for the first time since Aldrich's accusations, she had hope that there might be another path forward. The sun was setting over the impossible garden, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold and silver. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, desperate research, and difficult negotiations with courts that had never truly trusted each other. But tonight, surrounded by the two people who had become her anchors in this transformed world, Elara allowed herself to believe that love and ingenuity might yet triumph over fear and destruction. The future remained uncertain, but it was no longer hopeless. And in the garden where day and night flowers bloomed side by side, that was enough to sustain her through whatever trials lay ahead.